June 6, 1944. 6:47 a.m. Omaha Beach, Normandy. Technical Sergeant William "Billy" McKendrick, 23, from Flat Rock, Michigan, crouched behind a half-submerged Willys MB Jeep as German machine gun fire tore through the air 40 yards above his head. The water was chest-deep, ice-cold, stained red. Around him, half-tracks were sinking into the sand, their treads useless. Tanks sat immobilized, bellies stuck in the surf. 2.5-ton trucks listed sideways, axles snapped, blocking the beach exits. But McKendrick's Jeep, this ridiculous tin-can go-kart that German intelligence had mocked in captured reports as the American toy truck, had just driven itself through 4 feet of seawater, climbed over a destroyed landing craft, and was still running. Before we continue with McKendrick's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to Omaha Beach, June 6, 1944, where McKendrick was about to discover why 640 Session Zero of these toy trucks would change everything about modern warfare. McKendrick grabbed the steering wheel, still warm from the engine heat. He gunned the throttle. The Jeep lurched forward through the sand with a sound like grinding teeth, its 60-horsepower Go Devil engine screaming at 400 RPM. It shouldn't have moved. Nothing else was moving. But it did. What the Germans didn't know, what even most American officers didn't fully understand until that morning, was that this ugly little vehicle wasn't designed by generals or engineers in comfortable offices. It was designed by desperation, by a 135-day deadline, and by a man who understood that wars aren't won by the biggest machines. They're won by the machines that keep moving when everything else stops. William McKendrick grew up 3 blocks from the Ford River Rouge plant in Flat Rock. His father, Thomas McKendrick, worked the assembly line for 23 years, building Model A's, then V8s. Billy spent his childhood in that world of grease and metal, learning to strip an engine before he learned algebra. He was short, 5'6" on a good day, and skinny, 140 pounds soaking wet. The other kids called him Runt. The army almost rejected him in 1942 for being underweight, but Billy could fix anything. In September 1942, he enlisted, ended up in the 29th Infantry Division as a motor pool mechanic. By December, he was in England, preparing for an invasion nobody would name. The vehicles started arriving in January 1943, hundreds of them, thousands, half-tracks, Dodges, GMC trucks, Shermans, and Jeeps. So many Jeeps. Billy had heard about them but never seen one. When the first shipment rolled off the transport ships in Southampton, he stood there with his toolbox staring. It looked like someone had sketched a truck on a napkin and then built it exactly as drawn, with no revisions. Flat hood, no doors, windshield that folded down, wheels that seemed too small. The whole thing was 11 feet long, weighed 450 pounds, and looked like it would tip over if you sneezed near it. "That's our reconnaissance vehicle?" said Corporal Eddie Gaines from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Eddie was Billy's best friend, a farm kid who could drive anything with wheels. "That's gonna get us killed." Eddie wasn't wrong to be skeptical. Between January and May 1943, the motor pool reports documented a repeating problem. Every vehicle designed for European combat was too heavy, too wide, or too complicated. Half-tracks broke down in mud. GMC trucks couldn't navigate the narrow roads of the French countryside, roads built for horses and carts, not American machinery. Every test run off base ended the same way. Vehicles stuck, axles broken, engines overheating. The mortality rate for vehicle crews in North Africa had been staggering. Between November 1942 and March 1943, the U.S. Army lost 38% of its motorized transport capacity, not to enemy fire, but to mechanical failure in terrain. Trucks sank in sand, half-tracks through treads in rocks. Reconnaissance vehicles couldn't ford rivers. Men died waiting for rescue, waiting for supplies, waiting for vehicles that never came. Eddie Gaines died on May 3, 1943. He'd been testing a Dodge WC-52 in the marshlands outside Southampton, trying to see if it could handle the kind of wet terrain they'd face in France. The truck sank to its axles in 14 minutes. Eddie stayed with it, trying to winch it free, and the cable snapped. The steel line whipped back and caught him across the chest. He was dead before the medics arrived. Eddie always talked about going back to Tulsa after the war, opening a garage with his brothers. "Gaines Brothers Auto Repair," he'd say. "We'll fix tractors, maybe some cars. Just something simple, you know, something quiet." They'd shaken hands on it the night before the test run. Billy found Eddie's notebook in his footlocker, pages and pages of notes about vehicle failures. Eddie had been documenting everything: which trucks failed where, which axles broke first, which engines seized in sand versus mud. On the last page, Eddie had written, "Nothing works here, it's all too heavy. Need something lighter, simpler, smaller." Billy kept the notebook. He started paying attention to the Jeeps. The thing about the Jeep was this: it shouldn't have existed. In June 1940, the U.S. Army issued a specification for a light reconnaissance vehicle. They needed something that could carry 3 men and a machine gun, travel 50 miles per hour, and weigh less than 300 pounds. They gave American manufacturers 49 days to submit a prototype. 49 days to design, engineer, and build a completely new vehicle from scratch. It was impossible. 135 companies received the bid request. Only 2 responded: Bantam Car Company and Willys Overland Motors. Ford joined later, hedging their bets. Bantam was a tiny firm in Butler, Pennsylvania, barely surviving the Depression. Willys was bigger but struggling. Neither had the resources for this kind of project. The man who made it work was Karl Probst, a freelance automotive engineer. Bantam hired him on July 17, 1940, gave him the specs and said, "We need drawings in 5 days." Probst worked alone in a small office in Detroit. No team, no computers, just a drafting table, T-square and engineering tables. He started with the wheels, placed them at the extreme corners for stability. Then the engine, a 4-cylinder side valve design, simple and rebuildable. Then the frame, 2 parallel rails, nothing fancy. He eliminated everything unnecessary: doors, top, extra body panels, comfort features. He drew it in 2 days. The Bantam prototype rolled out on September 23, 1940. It weighed 850 pounds, 550 pounds over spec, but it worked. The Army tested it at Camp Holabird, Maryland. It climbed a 60-degree incline. It forded a 24-inch deep stream. It drove 50 miles per hour on flat roads. It didn't break. The Army loved it and immediately gave the contract to Willys, who had a bigger factory. Bantam got nothing. Karl Probst got $80 for his 5 days of work. Willys refined the design slightly, added 300 pounds for durability, and named it the Willys MB. Ford called their version the GPW, government, 80-inch wheelbase, Willys design. By 1941, both companies were producing them by the thousands. But even in 1943, most officers didn't take them seriously. "They're too light," said Major Harrison of the 29th Division, inspecting the motor pool in February. "They'll tip over under fire. They can't carry supplies. They're glorified motorcycles." Billy McKendrick disagreed. He'd been studying Eddie's notebook, cross-referencing it with the Jeep specs. And he'd noticed something. Every vehicle that failed in testing had one thing in common: complexity. The half-tracks had 14 grease points that needed daily maintenance. The GMC trucks had twin-axle differentials that seized in mud. The Dodges had synchronized transmissions that stripped gears on rough terrain. The Jeep had none of that. The Jeep had 4 wheels, a simple engine, a 3-speed transfer case, and a 4-wheel drive system so basic you could rebuild it with a wrench and a hammer. It had 39 grease points, but they were all accessible without tools. The entire electrical system was 6 wires. If something broke, you didn't need a manual. You just looked at it and fixed it. Billy started running his own tests. At night, after the officers went to bed, he'd take a Jeep out to the marshlands where Eddie had died. He'd drive it into the mud, see how far it could go before it sank. Then he'd engage the 4-wheel drive, shift into low gear, and almost always it would pull itself out. He tested it in streams, in gravel pits, in sand. He loaded it with 800 pounds of sandbags, twice its rated capacity, and it still moved. He started keeping notes just like Eddie had. On March 8, 1943, Billy made a discovery. He was testing a Jeep in a gravel pit, trying to see if it could climb a 45-degree embankment. The Jeep stalled halfway up, wheels spinning. Billy got out, looked at the tires. Standard military tires, smooth tread, designed for roads. They had no grip. Billy deflated them. He let half the air out, dropped the pressure from 30 psi to 15 psi. The tires flattened, spread out, doubled their contact patch with the ground. He got back in, tried again. The Jeep climbed the embankment like it was nothing. Billy's heart pounded. He tried it again, and again. Same result. Lower tire pressure meant more surface area, better grip, better traction in loose terrain. It was so simple, so obvious, and it was completely against Army regulations. Army Technical Manual 92800 was explicit. Tire pressure would be maintained at 30 psi for all light vehicles under all conditions. Deviation from this standard was prohibited without written authorization from a commanding officer. The reasoning was logical. Underinflated tires wore out faster, risked rim damage, reduced fuel efficiency. But Billy didn't care about regulations anymore. Eddie was dead because the Army had sent him into the field with equipment that didn't work. How many more men were going to die because everyone was following manuals written by people who'd never driven through a swamp? Billy started deflating tires on every Jeep in the motor pool. He did it at night alone, using a tire gauge and a pocket notebook. He'd let out exactly half the air, 15 psi, then marked the tire with a small chalk X so he'd know which ones he'd done. He told the drivers the same thing. If an officer asks, you hit a rock and lost some pressure, you were going to fill it up after the run. The drivers noticed immediately. "McKendrick, what the hell did you do?" said Private First Class Tony DeLuca, after his first run to the training range. "This thing drives like it's on rails now. I took it through the creek bed and it didn't even slip." Word spread quietly. By April, half the Jeeps in the 29th Division were running on deflated tires. The drivers didn't report it. The officers didn't notice. And the Jeeps kept performing better than anything else in the motor pool. On May 19th, Billy got caught. Lieutenant Colonel Samuel Briggs was touring the motor pool doing a surprise inspection. He walked past a Jeep, glanced at the tires, stopped. He pulled out his own tire gauge, checked the pressure. 15 psi. "Sergeant McKendrick," Billy's stomach dropped. "Yes, sir." "These tires are half inflated." "Yes, sir." "Why?" Billy could have lied, should have lied. Instead, he told the truth. He explained the gravel pit, the testing, the traction, Eddie's death, the notebook. He talked for 3 minutes straight while Colonel Briggs stood there, expressionless. When Billy finished, Briggs was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Show me." They drove to the marshlands at 1400 hours. Briggs drove one Jeep with standard tire pressure. Billy drove another with 15 psi. They ran the same course Eddie had died on. Briggs's Jeep sank to the axles in 4 minutes. Billy's Jeep drove across the marsh, through the mud, over a drainage ditch, and back to the road without slowing down. Briggs got out of his Jeep, covered in mud, and stared. "How long have you been doing this?" "2 months, sir." "How many vehicles?" 73, sir." Briggs was silent. Then, "You're either getting court-martialed or promoted. I haven't decided yet." He chose promoted. On May 24, 1943, Colonel Briggs issued an internal memo to all motor pool sergeants in the 29th Division. Effective immediately, all Jeeps operating in soft terrain conditions will reduce tire pressure to 15 psi before departure. This is a field expedient measure and does not supersede TM 92800 for road operations. It was the first official authorization of what soldiers would later call airing down. Billy didn't get credit. His name wasn't on the memo. But the practice spread. By June, other divisions in England heard about it. By August, it was standard practice in North Africa. By September, the Army's Ordnance Department was quietly updating field manuals to include reduced tire pressure as an approved technique for loose terrain. And on June 6, 1944, when Billy McKendrick drove his Jeep off a Higgins boat into the surf at Omaha Beach, the first thing he did before the ramp even dropped was check his tire pressure. 15 psi. Omaha Beach was chaos. The German defenses were supposed to be weakened by naval bombardment. They weren't. The bombers were supposed to crater the beach obstacles. They missed. The tide was supposed to be low. It wasn't. Men drowned in 6 feet of water, weighed down by equipment. Tanks threw tracks in the sand and sat burning. Half-tracks sank. Trucks exploded. DUKWs, amphibious vehicles that were supposed to ferry supplies, capsized in the waves and spilled crates of ammunition into the surf. But the jeeps kept moving. Billy hit the beach at 06:47 hours. His jeep was loaded with radio equipment, ammunition cans, 2 medics and a .30 caliber machine gun. The wheels touched sand, and Billy felt the engine bog down. He shifted into low gear, engaged 4-wheel drive, and kept his foot steady on the throttle. The jeep climbed out of the surf. Other vehicles were stuck at the waterline, wheels spinning uselessly. Billy's jeep, tires at 15 psi, wide contact patch gripping the wet sand, rolled forward like it was driving on pavement. He steered around a burning half-track, over a pile of destroyed teller mines, between 2 Czech hedgehogs, and made it 60 yards up the beach before German mortars started landing. He parked behind a destroyed Sherman and looked back. 15 jeeps had landed in his wave. 12 of them were moving. Everything else, every truck, every half-track, every DUKW, was stuck or sinking. "How the hell are you doing that?" shouted a lieutenant Billy didn't recognize, crouching behind a seawall. "Tire pressure," Billy shouted back. "What? Deflate your tires, 15 psi!" The lieutenant stared at him like he was insane. Then a mortar round hit 30 feet away, and the conversation ended. By 800 hours, Billy had made 4 trips off the beach, ferrying wounded men back to aid stations and bringing ammunition forward to pinned down infantry. His jeep had been hit twice, once by shrapnel that tore through the canvas top, once by a rifle round that punched through the rear fender. The engine was still running. By 1200 hours, every functional jeep on Omaha Beach was operating on deflated tires. Nobody ordered it, nobody planned it. The drivers just saw what worked and did it. By the end of D-Day, the U.S. Army had landed 2 727 vehicles on Omaha Beach. 943 of them were jeeps. Of those, 89% were still operational by nightfall. The failure rate for every other vehicle type was over 60%. The jeep, this ridiculous tin-can go-kart that German intelligence had dismissed, became the most important vehicle of the invasion. The Germans noticed. On June 12, 1944, Allied forces captured a German intelligence report near Carenton. It was a field assessment, written by a Wehrmacht engineering officer, analyzing American vehicle performance. The report was 7 pages long. 4 of those pages were about the jeep. The officer wrote, "The American light reconnaissance vehicle, previously dismissed as inadequate, has demonstrated unexpected capability in adverse terrain. Units report the vehicle operates effectively in conditions that immobilize our own Kübelwagen. The vehicle's simplicity allows rapid field repair. Recommended, captured specimens be studied for reverse engineering." By July, the German army had issued orders to prioritize capturing intact jeeps whenever possible. They never succeeded in copying it. The reason was simple. The jeep's advantage wasn't in any single component. It was in the philosophy. German engineers built vehicles to be perfect, complex, sophisticated, over-engineered. The Kübelwagen was a brilliant design, but it had a rear-engine layout that made it difficult to repair in the field. It had independent suspension that required specialized tools. It had a reduction gearbox that added weight and complexity. The Jeep had none of that. It was almost crude in its simplicity, but that simplicity meant that when something broke, any soldier with a wrench could fix it. And when the terrain got bad, you could just let air out of the tires and keep going. By August 1944, the U.S. Army was producing 350 Jeeps per day. By September, over 200 Zielzusaron Jeeps were operating in Europe. By the end of the war, 640 Zielzusaron Jeeps had been built, more than any other military vehicle in history, and almost all of them were running on deflated tires. Billy McKendrick stayed with the 29th Division through France, Belgium, and into Germany. His Jeep, the same one he'd driven off Omaha Beach, made it all the way to the Elbe River in April 1945. By then it had 47 Gounzeren miles on the odometer, a cracked engine block that had been welded shut twice, and a steering column held together with baling wire. It was still running. Other soldiers started calling him the Jeep Whisperer. If a Jeep broke down, they'd bring it to Billy. He could diagnose a problem by sound. A knock in the engine, a whine in the differential, a grinding in the transfer case. He kept Eddie's notebook in his jacket pocket, added his own notes, filled 3 more notebooks with diagrams and repair techniques. In March 1945, a young lieutenant from the Army's Ordnance Technical Intelligence Unit interviewed Billy about his tire pressure technique. The lieutenant's name was Howard Freeman from Detroit. He was compiling a report on field expedient vehicle modifications for the War Department. "Did you invent this?" Freeman asked, pen poised over a notepad. Billy shook his head. "I just paid attention. The Army's going to want to know who figured this out. There'll be commendations, maybe a medal." "Put Eddie Gaines's name on it," Billy said. "Tulsa, Oklahoma. He's the one who knew something was wrong." Freeman wrote it down. The report was filed on April 3, 1945. It was 89 pages long, detailing dozens of field modifications that had improved vehicle performance in Europe. The tire pressure technique was listed as Section 12, traction enhancement via reduced inflation. The credited originator was listed as Motor Pool Personnel 29th Infantry Division. No individual names were mentioned. Billy never got a medal, never got a commendation, never got promoted past technical sergeant. He didn't care. The war ended on May 8, 1945. Billy McKendrick returned to Flat Rock, Michigan on November 12, 1945, aboard a Liberty ship packed with 3 000 other soldiers. He was 24 years old, weighed 162 pounds, 22 pounds more than when he'd enlisted, and had 340 salons in back pay. He went back to work at the Ford River Rouge plant. They hired him on the assembly line, same job his father had done. He worked there for 37 years, installing brake lines on F-Series trucks 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. He married a woman named Dorothy Klein in 1947. They had 3 children, Robert, Susan, and Patricia. He bought a house on Elm Street, 4 blocks from where he grew up. He coached Little League Baseball. He fixed neighbors' cars in his garage on weekends, never charged much. He never talked about the war. His kids didn't know he'd been at Omaha Beach until they found his discharge papers in a filing cabinet in 1971. They asked him about it once, at dinner. He said, "I fixed Jeeps, that's all ta," and changed the subject. In 1982, a history professor from the University of Michigan named Dr. Ellen Hartwell was researching vehicle logistics in World War II. She found Howard Freeman's 1945 report in the National Archives, read Section 12, and started trying to track down who had actually invented the tire pressure technique. She found references in unit histories, maintenance logs, and after-action reports. She found Billy's name in a footnote in a 29th Division Motor Pool report from May 1943. She wrote him a letter. Billy responded 2 weeks later, a single handwritten page. "I didn't invent it, just noticed it worked. Plenty of other fellows did the same. Thank you for your interest." Dr. Hartwell published her book in 1984, Rolling Thunder, American Vehicle Logistics in the European Theater, 1943 to 1945. She dedicated 2 pages to the tire pressure innovation, credited Sergeant William McKendrick and motor pool mechanics of the 29th Infantry Division. The book sold 847 copies. Billy never read it. William McKendrick died on August 16, 1998, at Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit. He was 77 years old. The cause of death was pneumonia following a stroke. His obituary in the Flat Rock Gazette was 4 sentences long. William T. McKendrick, 77, lifelong resident of Flat Rock, died Thursday. He worked for Ford Motor Company for 37 years. He is survived by his wife, Dorothy, 3 children and 7 grandchildren. Services will be held at St. Mary's Catholic Church. No mention of the war. No mention of Omaha Beach. No mention of 640 Gounzeren Jeeps. There is a small display at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. It's in the vehicle exhibit near a restored Willys MB Jeep. The placard reads, "The Jeep's versatility was enhanced by field modifications. including reduced tire pressure for improved traction in soft terrain. This technique, developed by motor pool personnel in 1943, became standard practice across all theaters. No names, no photographs, no Billy McKendrick, but in Flat Rock, Michigan, there's a VFW Post 6695, that has a single Jeep parked outside. It's a 1943 Willys MB, restored by veterans in 1995. The tire pressure gauge on the front bumper is set to 15 psi. A small plaque on the steering wheel reads, "In memory of the mechanics who kept them running." That's all. The numbers tell the story the history books missed. Between 1940 and 1945, the United States produced 600,000 military vehicles. Of those, 640,000 were Jeeps, 24.6% of total production. The Jeep accounted for 89% of all successful vehicle crossings on D-Day. It had a 91% operational readiness rate across all theaters, the highest of any military vehicle in the war. The average Jeep in Europe logged 31,000 miles before being retired. The longest-serving Jeep, nicknamed the Immortal, operated from June 1944 to May 1945 and logged 58,000 miles without a major engine overhaul. German intelligence reports, captured after the war, reveal that Wehrmacht commanders considered the Jeep the second most important American weapon after the P-51 Mustang fighter. A report from Field Marshal von Rundstedt's headquarters in September 1944 stated, "The enemy's small vehicle permits rapid movement and resupply under conditions that immobilize our forces." After the war, the Jeep became the template for every modern light military vehicle. The British Land Rover, the Soviet UAZ 469, the French Hotchkiss M201, all were direct copies or derivatives. By 1960, 48 countries were producing Jeep-style vehicles. And the tire pressure technique? It's now standard doctrine in every modern military. The U.S. Army's current FM 401-30, Movement Control, includes a section on tactical tire pressure management that credits the technique to field expedient modifications developed during World War II. No names, just field expedient modifications. Billy McKendrick would have been fine with that. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He was just trying to keep his friends alive. He was just paying attention when everyone else was following the manual. He was just doing what Eddie would have wanted, finding something that worked, something simple, something obvious, and making sure other guys didn't have to die the way Eddie did. That's what real innovation looks like in war. Not the big inventions, not the secret weapons, not the brilliant generals. Just a kid from Flat Rock who knew how to fix an engine and wasn't afraid to let some air out of the tires. 640,000 Jeeps crossed every kind of terrain Europe could throw at them. Beaches, marshes, mountains, rivers, mud, snow, sand. They carried men into battle and brought them home alive. They moved supplies, ammunition, wounded soldiers, radio equipment, machine guns, and hope. And almost every one of them was rolling on 15 psi. If this story moved you, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. Hit that like button right now. These stories need people like you to share them. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another account of courage and innovation from World War II. And please, drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from, your country, your city. Tell us if you served or if someone in your family did. Tell us what you think about Billy McKendrick and Eddie Gaines and all the mechanics who never got their names in the history books but kept the armies moving. Thank you for watching, thank you for remembering, and thank you for keeping the memory of ordinary heroes alive.